So welcome to It's Not All About the Numbers, the leadership podcast that doesn't just focus on the bottom line. Hi, my name is Chris, and that is Mike.
Hi, everyone.
And this week, our co-host is Lisa Allen, Director of Data at the Pensions Regulator and the co-author of the Little Book of Data. So welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thank you. And we're digging, no doubt, to the Little Book of Data a bit later and the Pensions Regulator. But let's just have a quick chat about how the week went. But just a reminder to everybody, if you are enjoying what we're doing, then do hit subscribe and click those 5 stars because it really helps the algorithms, if nothing else. So, Mike, how's your week been?
It makes me feel validated as well if people do that. So
okay,
that's clear. That's clearly important.
Do it for Mike.
So my week's been a Gen CFO week, Chris. As you know, I think we've seen each other every day for it feels like for the last week.
I know it's been terrible.
Started with the Gen CFO meeting, face-to-face meet in London last week, and then through the mastermind on Tuesday. We recorded a special pod on Wednesday. We did the lunch and learn yesterday, and here we are again on Friday doing another podcast. So I mean, basically it feels like I've been part of Gen CFO all week. So
I hope you're not charging me for any of that, but it was far too much fun.
Well, no, it's just validation for me. In terms of kind of like the outside of work stuff, I just wanted to mention a new podcast I started listening to, which is called A Muslim and a Jew Go There, with Saeed Avarsi and David Baddiel, which is an absolutely fascinating listen on the conflict in Gaza and kind of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, with the two debating from their respective perspectives. I just wanted to throw that in there as something incredibly interesting.
And they go there as in, don't go there.
They talk about stuff that you wouldn't normally talk about.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I love the sound of that. And a constructive conversation rather than a 100%, fingers in ears argument. Yeah, love it. Great. So, Lisa, how about yourself? I'm not sure whether you're into podcasts, but how's your week been?
Oh yeah, I do love a good podcast actually. But this week I've actually been listening to audiobook. So I use my commute to listen to audiobooks or podcasts. And this week it's been The Diary of a CEO. So that's been quite interesting. I've been loving the little nuggets that are coming from there and how the behaviour had changed. And if anybody hasn't read it yet, how you don't need to pay for marketing, how you just need to buy a big blue slide. I think you need to read the book to get the understanding of that. If nobody's heard of it.
I've not heard of it. I did heard of the big blue and yellow logo from I think it was Tesco's, who then had to get rid of it because Lidl said it was theirs. But you're not talking about that, are you?
No, they said that in the book that you didn't have to pay for marketing because they just put a really big blue slide down from their gaming area and everybody wanted a photo next to the big blue slide, which meant it advertised his company for him. So that was quite interesting.
That was Stephen Bartlett, was it?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. You could have a listen now, aren't you?
Yeah, no, definitely. If it's that easy, we'll all be doing it.
I've written it down.
Yeah, and I suppose for me, in a personal capacity, so I went to a funeral yesterday. So it was my best friend's dad. So my dad sadly passed away a month ago. We've always done stuff together, and her dad passed away on my dad's birthday. So yeah, that was humbling, but it just makes you realise it's about people, doesn't it?
Yeah, and great for you to support each other at that time. But yeah, sorry to hear that. And how do you recharge the batteries? Obviously, that's been a bit of a tricky week.
Well, normally I love running, so I spend quite a lot of time running, and I normally come back with some crazy ideas for work. So this week I've been getting all excited about how we can make sure that we can engage everybody at TPR, so the pension regulator, with data from what we collect, but also from the industry, and how you can, if we can show how many people have retired in the last month and how our work really impacts on making their lives better at that stage of their life. So that was one of the little light bulbs I had when I was running. So it's normally about running, or I do street dancing as well, which is always good fun too.
Wow. Are you for hire? Because we've got an awards coming up in June.
I'm shocking. I like to add.
Love it, love it. Well, sounds like a mixed week, but thanks for being here. So, yeah, as Mike said, it's been a busy week in the world of Gen CFO, my business. But without repeating all that stuff, the meet was fantastic. Actually, the London meet that we have in Fitzrovia, and it was all about reimagining the workforce, and we kind of went into the transformation on the talent side, and it was sort of split between the sort of skills and the talent, the soft side, I suppose, and then the actual environment, so what's happening in the office, in the workplace. Really interesting chat. And it was made more interesting because we had the CFO from OnlyFans there and the CFO from Pizza Hut there, as well as Chief People Officer from Planful, which is an analytics company. So a really great chat. They made my life very easy as host and facilitator, because there was so much great chat there. On the personal side, continue the dog walking. And I've been just about sticking to the 7 o'clock gym session, which I have to say is a bit of a revolution for me, because I used to do my exercise in the evening, and it was so much harder. Like, Lisa, I don't know when you go for your runs, but I've realized, as much as I'm a night owl, exercising first thing before work gets in the way. Seems to be a really smart move.
Yeah, I normally go in the mornings, actually, before work, or at the weekends. Apparently, there's some stats that show that you're better in the afternoon, between about 2 and 5. So if I'm going to do my longer runs, then I go at that time, and I get better times.
Well, there you go.
I'm definitely morning, before I eat in the morning.
Good one. We might come back to that, actually. So what happened this week? I found, obviously we always try to dig around for something data related, and I found something quite interesting this week, which reinforced a lot of the messages that we have on this podcast. And it was the CXO Europe Data Summit. And there was a keynote there by someone that Lisa knows very well, Caroline Bellamy. And she was basically saying that it was great to see such a focus on delivering outcomes and on delivering people and skills, rather than, even, this is a data summit, right? Even focused on the data capability. And as much as everyone's getting excited about the AI core capability, it's like, look, we need to work out how to go on this journey. How do you know Caroline, and what's your sort of take on that outcomes and people first approach?
Yeah, definitely. So Caroline's amazing. So I used to work with her. She was my CDO when I was we're both at Ordnance Survey together. And yeah, I'm totally with that. I think it's interesting, actually. So I only started in the pension regulator back in November, and I've been revisiting some of the books and things. So I've been re-listening to, on my commute, Start With Why, because that's all about the outcomes, isn't it? I don't think it's about, you can't just do data for data's sake. It's got to be about the outcomes you're going to unlock, and then the people and how you make them feel and bringing them on the journey. You can't just start with all the techie side of things. I definitely think you lose people.
Yeah, the Start With Why. I can't tell you how many times I've referred back to that over the years. I can never remember what happens next, whether it's the how or the what, or the what or the how, but it's definitely start with the why.
I mean, it's almost that bit doesn't matter, right? It's almost that I like to boil things down to the simplest possible thing, and for me, start with why is actually what is the human motivating factor in anything that's going on. And that links to what you're talking about with Caroline's keynote, really, which is what I'm hearing from that is that there's this underpinning data literacy question that's going on, where people don't necessarily understand why they should care, and they don't understand what's important around data and why it's important, and how that links to like the outcomes and deliverables. And I think that, yeah, I really like you drawing it back to Start With Why, Lisa, because it's that, why should I care? Why should I really give a monkeys about all of this? It's not just data, all of this stuff.
I think the other part to this is that people talk about, investing in people is actually investing in sort of future effort. So, if I make you feel amazing today, you're probably going to pay back in the future. And I think there's a lot in that when it comes to transformation and change, and starting with the why, because if I can make you feel good about this project, focus on your problems, give you a sort of direction that you're happy with and you feel comfortable with, and obviously we talk about psychological security and safety quite a lot, then you're going to put in the effort when we're asking for it later on. But without it, it's just a forced change, and then it tends to fall flat on its face. I can see you nodding there, Lisa.
Yeah, so I think it's about the connection, isn't it, for people to that outcome? Because there's nothing worse to feel disconnected about why. You want that purpose, don't you? And I think it was always interesting when we used to use these when we asked the why when I was at Ordnance Survey, because we collect so much data then, and like one of the data ones we were collecting was on bridge heights, and if you didn't ask the why, you could end up with really bad outcomes. So if you were using bridge heights for navigation for a car, it might not be a problem. But if you're using bridge heights for a lorry and you've not asked why do you want it, then suddenly if you didn't have the accuracy you needed, there's going to be lorries getting stuck or, crashing into bridges. So it's a really good way of just thinking about why. You need to go back to that why, because you just can't start from the middle of it just because.
I love it. I love it. There have been some lovely stories coming out of this podcast that I never thought, because obviously I work more on the business side and the commercial sort of data side. So, we had Giuseppe on a couple of weeks ago, and it's all about toilet data and trying to find a public convenience. Bridge height equally, but these things sound so kind of unimportant, but actually it's so important, right? If you want to get around the country, or if you've got kids or whatever, you're looking for a toilet. That's fantastic. So just sort of turning to you a little bit, I think you've mentioned a few things here. You mentioned the Ordnance Survey. You're now at the Pension Regulator, and you're Director of Data. And I know Mike knows you from ages ago, but what's been your journey to get to the Pension Regulator?
Yeah, somebody said to me the other day I had a wiggly career. So yes, it's quite interesting.
They're the best.
Yeah. So I actually started off as an environmental scientist. So that was what I was trained in. And I started off with the National Rivers Authority. So I was looking at bugs in rivers and microbiology. So that was all about, though, collecting data. So that methodology, the methodology was really strong in that. And then that's why I met Mike, because when I was at the Environment Agency, we were both there as like waste officers and going out onto site. So that was the first time we started working together. And strangely enough, we both ended up in data. So I ended up in data because I was running an environmental crime team that we used to use data analysis to look at where the crimes were committed, and we were sharing intel with the police. And I wanted to make sure that our data quality was better. So then I went to head office and started my first, forays into data. And lo and behold, there was Mike in the data department. So yeah, I think you were there first, weren't you, Mike?
This wasn't back in the day when he was going on site and finding dogs and porter cabins
So that's what I was just going to say, actually. So my journey to data was similar to Lisa's in some respects. In the start point, Lisa got into data via wanting to do the environmental crime and environmental regulation bit. I got into data to get away from environmental crime and regulation. I didn't want to be anywhere near those buggers. So yeah, we ended up in the same place, starting from the same place, but our modus operandi was definitely different.
Amazing. And environmental crime, that right now seems to be, I don't know whether this is the same, maybe you can explain, but the headlines at the moment are all about emissions into streams from all the water companies and things like that. Is that the sort of thing that you're talking about, or is it something else?
Yeah, so there are offences under so the Environment Agency is a regulator. So same the way that there's the pensions regulator is there as a regulator. How many times can you get regulator in there? So they're looking at different aspects. So with the Environment Agency, we'll look at emissions to rivers or to land. So you'll get all the waste side of things as well. So yeah, that's all part of the things that they look after.
And what was Mike like back then? I've got to ask.
Wow. It was quite a pain. He was quite a pain.
Because he's hung around for quite a while.
Yeah. I think that we used to clash, didn't we, Mike? We'd probably both be quite open to say that. And that Mike's the one who made me coin the phrase, it's the grit in the oyster that gets the pearl, because Mike was the grit quite a lot of times. But you have to sometimes move through that and understand about the different perspectives that somebody else can bring. But I think often we were saying the same thing, but from a very different angle.
So
Good for you. Good for
and
you.
I would 100% agree with that. I think that I would go a step further and say, so quite a lot of my shtick these days is about understanding where the other person's coming from, and it probably is working with Lisa that really made me consider that as a thing, because quite often when you unpick the hot air that we were both blowing, we were saying the same thing from different perspectives when working in the same team. So actually that kind of stopping, listening a bit harder and trying to understand where people are coming from definitely came from being the grit in the oyster. I like that. That's a four letter name that I've been called that I like.
Just out of curiosity, because we have talked about like conflict in the past on this, and I do totally recognize the relationship. I was effectively an internal consultant working with a lot of external consultants, and you bash your head together, but when you meet each other afterwards, you kind of know that you've been through something together significant. And I have absolute respect for all of the best consultants that I worked with. But when you were going through that, was there anything that you learned or you read, or any courses that you went on? It's one of the most popular books is Surrounded by Idiots, and the sort of whole personality assessment type profiling type approach to this.
I think it was a course, wasn't we? We both went on that emotional resilience course, didn't we? Separately. So we're lucky enough we weren't on the same course, because that would have been awkward. We would have been using each other as examples. But so that was really good and really insightful. I think it just made you consider other perspectives. So for me, I was reading quite a lot at that time about emotional resilience and understand other people's perspective. There was one book I read about emotional intelligence, about a guy that was on a train and everyone was getting really cross with him because his kids were running around, and somebody said, well, I'm going to have a go because he's not got control of his kids. And then they went up to him and said, get control of your kids. And the guy just said, well, I'm really sorry, I've just come from a hospital, my wife just died. And that point you're just like, sometimes there's a different perspective that you just don't see. And just trying to work through that, just working through that really, and being more curious. Yeah. I don't know, Mike, what your thoughts? You went on that course, didn't you? Lucky enough, separately from me.
Yeah, no. So that emotional intelligence, emotional resilience course was amazing. I mean, the Environment Agency sent us on a huge array of courses. A lot of them were very, very useful. Unconscious bias was another one which sticks in the mind. But yeah, it was that. It's being given the tools to actually stop and analyze how things are reacting. So there was something in there about parent-child relationships and how you can trigger a parent-child relationship by how you act. So if you change how you act, you make it more peer-to-peer rather than parent-child and stuff like that. It was just really interesting, because you could all of a sudden go, oh yeah, that's what happened there. I was being patronizing or whatever, and I didn't mean to be, but or maybe I did, but that triggered a reaction, which then caused a spiral. So yeah, it was that.
How many years ago was this? Because I seem to remember there was a massive drive to have this type of training at the time, because it had been proved to be really successful in the US Army. I don't know whether that was part of the introduction to it, but basically the US Army realized that they almost needed a sort of stoicism in their soldiers. They almost needed these sort of philosopher warriors, and part of their training was this emotional resilience training, which was actually quite philosophical. It wasn't about just toughening it out and how to deal with interrogation or whatever. It was those sorts of things, and that was probably a good 10-15 years ago. I think.
Sounds about right.
It sounds about right. Yeah, definitely. There was quite a lot, I think, you learned from that as well. It also is about the different types of communication. I think it still stays with me today. So I'm, as Mike knows, a real extrovert in my thinking. It doesn't mean when I've put a thought out there that that's the finished article. I always say to people now, it's like mind putty. But if you're an introvert in thinking, you might go, oh, gosh, she means this. And actually, I don't. I'm just going, what do you think about this? Can you help me mold it? And that can be quite stressful when you're an introvert, because you're like having something thrown at you and thinking it's the finished article.
Yeah, that sounds very similar to me, actually. And I think the other bit is on top of that is, if you're the boss, the idea is seen as an order. So you actually really need to manage those messages, because this is just an idea. This is a conversation. This is something that I'm happy to chew up and get a lot of feedback on.
I think it comes a bit from background as well, and how you've sort of learned things. So I when I moved into data, I got into the licensing side of data, which meant that I worked really closely with lawyers, and the legal system in the UK is adversarial. So basically, you'll read something, you'll state a position, and then you'll argue about it. And when you argue about it you'll eventually get to a point where it's like, okay, we agree on that, and then that's right. But when you go out of that legal environment, and this is what I worked out working with, working through this thing with Lisa, was very much, okay, I state things like they're a certain position and I'm fixed on that position and it's fact. Whereas actually in my head, it's like I'm waiting to be challenged. I'm waiting for somebody to go, oh no, it's not quite like that. And actually through that kind of process of adversarial process, you get to a better place. But sometimes it can come across like, oh, he thinks he knows what he's talking about. He's already just made that decision. And so that's that self-awareness piece as well. I now know that, and I didn't know that.
So talking of self-awareness, we always ask
Shut up,
this,
Mike. Yeah, okay.
Talking of self-awareness and knowing when to stop. Lisa, I'm really interested. You sound like a great leader, someone who's been on a great journey. I love the meander as well, because I think, they're the most interesting careers. But why do you do what you do? What's the motivator for you?
Yeah, it's been interesting, isn't it? Because I wondered that early on in my career, how I could go from an aquatic biologist, microbiologist, to an environmental crime investigator, to suddenly being in data and then staying in data. So one of the things I did was the Clifton Strengths Finder. So I don't know if you've done the Clifton Strengths Finder. It's interesting when you look at your strengths for that. So the strengths for me that came out was like influencing, communication, winning others over, but input and learning. So for me, some of those other topics, they just didn't move fast enough. Data moves all the time. So I have to keep going. And that's what keeps my interest. And I really love doing that. But then because of the influence of communication, I love telling other people about how amazing it is and how it can help their outcomes. And I've always either stayed in the public sector or not-for-profit. So I spent a bit of time at the Open Data Institute. Actually, I worked with Mike there as well. And that was because it felt right. That was about a data ecosystem that works for everybody. So it's not about exploiting people. It's about actually helping deliver those outcomes through data. So I think it's interesting that it was a bit of an eye opener when I did that Clifton Strengths Finder. And I've used it as a bit of a navigation in whatever I've done, because it tells me about what I like doing and what my strengths are. So I need to stick with those and keep growing those.
It's a data-driven approach, right? So I can see why you loved it. I hadn't come across it actually before, but I have done something similar. You may have come across DISC profiling, DISC, and yeah, it's a similar sort of outcome mapped to all the jobs in the world and all the skills. But yeah, I can totally see why you enjoy that. And that when you use this, do you use this as sort of directional, or do you sort of take it as or is it the Bible for you in terms of career management, or is it just a reference?
I want to jump in on that, just if that's okay. So I did strengths. I've done strengths finders before, and I refer back to it. But the thing in there that I find most interesting is there's almost like a fundamental premise, which is you should focus on your strengths. Whereas quite a lot of the way that we're trained and taught is if you've got a weakness or a gap, you should try and fill it. You should definitely know what it is, but actually trying to fill it is almost like counter to how you work. So you should focus on your strengths and be conscious of your weaknesses and try and get support and help and build your team to help you fill those gaps. And that's the bit for me that comes out of the Strengths Finder that's really interesting. So where I've used it subsequently is when you end up in big teams, you can use it to see where your blind spots are within the team because you haven't got a strength filled.
So you do use it very much as, the guide.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think if you're looking at some of those things, like especially the jobs that I would go into, then I'd have to, because it's the stuff that gives you energy. And I know I always sound like I do have a lot of energy, and I know that can be exhausting for some people. But it's because actually I love what I do, because I'm always doing the stuff that is playing in my strengths. If I was doing stuff that actually wasn't a strength, that I'd find that draining. So I do have so much because actually I'm trying to target those strengths in the right areas.
That's brilliant. Well, that's a great bit of advice. So look out for the Clifton Strengths tool or assessment, and yeah, go on that journey. And would you agree with Mike that it's about sort of partnering on weaknesses rather than trying to actually cover them off yourself?
Definitely. I've used it like that of Teams. So and I'm now reflecting, actually, it's quite a data-led approach. So I've done mappings for a whole of my teams before, and then we've looked at where people have got strengths. So, because mine's about that communication, I love like song lyrics. I love to evoke the emotion. So I can tell where people haven't got that strength, and I'll be like, can you put it my way? Or can you put it to somebody in the team that has got that? Because I want to evoke that emotion. I want that story. I want people bought in. But then there's other people that have more analytical or competitive or strategic or relationship building, and you can you go and work with them because they're really good over there. So you can use it across the team to make the best out of the team and what you're trying to deliver.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I almost pictured you handing a microphone to someone saying, "Can you sing that for me? Because I'll hear it much better if you sing it in song." But look,
I haven't got them singing yet. I'm not going
I was going to say,
very good at karaoke.
Don't give her ideas. Bloody hell.
Next away day, we're going to sing our strategy. Excellent. Well, it's obviously worked, and you clearly have that drive. And I saw an accolade which I'd love to know a little bit more about. You were named as one of the top 100 in data IQ 100 a few years ago. How did that come about, and what's your take on sort of those lists?
They're always interesting, aren't they, with those? Yeah, so it was a few years ago now when we were working on that, and it's lovely, actually. I caught up with Ordnance Survey last week. They did a presentation, so I got to see the end of the story from all the stuff we were working on. And I think, I spent 3 years there, and it was so lovely because we were looking very much about transforming the data capability from just trying to produce data in one big block to how can you segment them out. And that meant that all the data capabilities had to be changed, but they had to be changed to make sure you're meeting user needs. So it was all about the user and then how you could do that. So that came about through that. And I think it's always really lovely to be put in those lists, isn't it? It's always a nice reflection. I think the other part of me now thinks that, though, that's not the outcome in itself. Like, I don't want to be running around trying to get in the list. I don't know if you guys get it on LinkedIn, where they're always trying to get you to be the influential promoter or speaker.
Yeah.
And part of me is thinking about the Stolen Focus book. I don't know if you read that one about trying to keep you on the platform. I'm a little bit more suspicious there, going, are you just trying to keep me on the platform? So yeah, it's interesting. I think it's great to be acknowledged. It's not something I will sit and pursue for its own right. I think it just comes about organically if you enjoy what you do.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really insightful point you make there, and I don't think it's a secret. People do add people to lists and say, "Hey, you're the top. You're the 35 under 35 or the 50 under 50 or whatever," because it drives huge engagement. So as a content marketing piece, it's really good for the person who's created it, not necessarily for the person who's on the list. And in fact, I know people who have asked to be removed because it's like, well, you know nothing about what I've achieved. It's just that you see that I've probably got a status and a following. So interesting stuff. But well done anyway. It's great to be acknowledged, I suppose. Mike could do with being on one of those lists by the sound of it. He needs that.
Do you want me to nominate you, Mike? Do you want me to put you down? What have you done?
Yeah, good, very, very good question. This has taken a turn I didn't expect.
He is saving Ethiopia's data strategy at the moment. That's what I hear, and the coffee culture as well. So look, great stuff. So it's at this point we like to ask and answer a question. So if you are interested in asking a question, then send us your questions to podcast@generationcfo.com. Gen CFO produced this podcast, or reach out to Mike and myself directly. Probably on LinkedIn is best. And we had a little pre-chat about something that we all have in common, actually, data related as well. So I just wanted to quickly ask you, you both have an interest in diabetes tech, diabetes data. And I have a nephew who's type 1 diabetes as well. So I just wanted to sort of ask you about that. Tell me a bit more about, that journey and trying to get this data tracked first, I would have thought, and then shared.
Shall I go first, given that I am the diabetes person here? So I am a type 1 diabetic. I was diagnosed when I was about 26. So after I joined the Environment Agency, and I think probably after I'd met you, Lisa. So I think I was still normal when we first met. So I'm diabetic. I'm on a pump, and use data and technology to manage. That's the reason I'm still alive, right? And one of the reasons I thought this would be a good thing for us to talk about is I remember really clearly Lisa coming into work one day when her son had been diagnosed as being diabetic, and actually she and I talking around what that meant and how that worked. So Lisa, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, he was 8 years old, so we'd had all the classic symptoms, he's actually a twin. So the interesting thing for me was that the reason we sort of picked it up was because they're competitive twins, and they kept jumping on the scales, and one was getting heavier and one was getting lighter, and we couldn't quite work out what was going on. And of course, we got dismissed by the pharmacy, who just said, "I'm sure it's fine." And then we ordered at that time from Amazon a testing kit, and he was shown to be type 1. So we managed to obviously run to the hospital and get him sorted. And I think it's such a shock, really, because with diabetes, you need an artificial pancreas. So the pump is acting as an artificial pancreas. You're taking something out of your body that your body normally does, but you're using data to help. So now he's on like a closed loop system, which means that if he goes too high, the algorithm says put more insulin in. If he goes too low, it says switch it off, which is an amazing bit of kit that, it's got controlling outside. Because when he first got diagnosed, and Mike knows, because we were talking like a different language. We were talking, basal rates, bolus. So people in the office probably thought we were a bit mad. And then Mike was coaching me not to be a neurotic parent, because this is really out of your control. And like at that time, it was finger pricking. You didn't have a continuous data feed. You just had it 4 times a day. He'd prick his finger, it'd be too high or be too low. And it's scary because the consequences either way are not great. So you need to keep within you're trying to mimic the body. And with an 8-year-old and only allow them to eat like 3 times a day because they're in their window. So at that point, it was really difficult. So yeah, I appreciate Mike all the time he spent with me, coaching me through that early journey. And now actually he's amazing. So he's 18 now, and does his own podcast with the Royal Barks, talking about helping newly diagnosed diabetics and trying to make less of a nuance of it, and that actually there's stuff out there that can really help you.
That's fantastic. What's his name? Just out.
Danny Kelly.
Danny Kelly podcast, diabetes. I'm sure you'll be able to find it.
I'm sure we put the link. Yeah, we'll have a little link.
Yeah, we should upload.
And this last summer, Danny and I actually at Open Data Camp, we pitched a session at Open Data Camp talking about diabetes tech and the fact that at the moment, the data that's gathered within the diabetes tech to manage like your diabetes is locked in. It's locked into the system. So I use an Ipsomed pump, and the Ipsomed software holds the data, and it's not accessible by anybody. You can't download it and give it to anybody else. It's kind of within there. So there's kind of like this huge bank of data that diabetics have that actually is locked away and is only held by the clinical service providers that could be shared much more widely to help health benefit, for people to do health research and research into diabetes and diabetes control. So that's kind of like the loop back to data is being in, how to be in control of the information about me, even if it's not technically my data because of the way that it's collected and the way that it's hosted. So yeah, that was a really kind of enlightening session that we did with Danny last year.
Sounds great. Were you pitching for funding for something, or? No,
it's just a discussion. It was pitching to discuss the issues. Yeah,
brilliant. Great for that. So Mike, we're going to move now on to good data, bad data. Just to wrap this up, I see you've probably been borrowing Giuseppe's newsletter again.
Well, clearly as a very good source,
I
viable
feel I feel like
source.
Giuseppe needs a credit in this podcast every week.
100%. I'm happy with that. But so the one that I grabbed from Giuseppe this time was around the accuracy of weather forecasts improving, and it's just a graph showing that over the last 40 years that the accuracy of weather forecasts has improved massively. And I think the 3-day forecast is now nearly 100% accurate. And 5-day forecasts are getting towards 95 to 100% accurate, which is just incredible if you think about it. Given that the amount of variables that are being modeled and calculated to come up with that forecast. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there as a huge credit to the Met agencies around the world that are running their supercomputers, really.
You know what I like about this as well, because it's relevant for business as well, that you're right, the 3-day forecast, looking at this, has actually been very accurate for quite a long time. But you've only got to move to the 10-day forecast for it to be actually wrong more than it's right, 40% right. So I actually, it's almost like a lesson in data science, right? It's like there is a certain range that you're going to get accuracy, but don't assume that if you extrapolate, there's going to be, because 10 days doesn't sound like a lot when you compare it to 3 days, but maybe 6 months or something in forecasting. But actually, it's just stay within your bands, I think is what I'm understanding from this. 3 to 5 days, you can pretty much predict your outings, but 10 days plus, do not do that. Brilliant.
And I suppose just linking that to like Lisa and my past in the Environment Agency, this is the kind of information that underpins flood forecasting and flood warnings. And you can see, therefore, why long-range flood forecasts are very variable, because the probability of it actually happening as suggested is lower, because the error rate is higher. But as you get closer and closer, the chances of you getting the forecast right are higher.
And you need to look into the space weather as well. I always love that, because they put those into the models. So yeah, that always makes me fascinated.
Space weather. Oh, that sounds fun.
You might need to get somebody from the Met Office or something on to talk about their supercomputer and space weather.
Space weather. Yeah, no, I love that. Noted. We've talked about SpaceX at the start of this podcast a few times, but that sounds a whole new level. Good stuff. And then we have a bit of bad data from your hometown, Mike.
I had to go there with the Birmingham City Council.
Yeah.
So Birmingham City Council, the largest local authority in Europe, was made technically bankrupt with a £760 million equal pay settlement that they had to pay, which has led to an announcement that council tax is going to rise by 10% this year and 20% over the 2-year period. £300 million worth of cuts across that 2-year period, which involves turning the streetlights off, less rubbish collections, they're shutting libraries, they're not investing in things like community lunch clubs and things like that, which sort of bring people together. And it's just like a massive consequence of this equal pay settlement. So to be clear, they shouldn't have got things wrong in terms of how they were paying people and that whole equal pay thing. But I think there's like a link to the water companies here in some respects, which is the consequence of that mismanagement. And the consequence of that is that we, the taxpayer, and we, the bill payer in the water companies, have to pay. We have to pay the cost for those mistakes. And there's just something that seems slightly unfair in there, that it ends up being like literally Joe Public, the man on the street, that pays the consequence for mismanagement and misinvestment in different ways.
And the lady on the street, can I just add?
The person, sorry, Lisa. Yes, the person on the streets. I do apologise.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the intellectual property man on the Clapham omnibus? I assume that needs to be the person on the Clapham omnibus as well.
I would have thought so. I was going to say that yesterday I was caught in traffic, and I saw the sign that said "Drive carefully. Your dad could work here." I was like, "Where's your mum? What's that sign?" So yes.
Yeah, it's this bit of news is complex, right? I don't think anyone can get in the way of the settlement, but yeah, the upside of it is is not good. Is not good for the taxpayer. In fact, you just reminded me that I really needed to comment on something probably right at the start of this podcast, which was last week we were slapping the wrist of HMRC, closing their helpline for people to actually get their taxes right and actually pay them tax. And they did a U-turn on it, didn't they? So within, I think, about 12 hours of it getting out there, we just happened to be quite hot on it when we recorded it. But that is, again, just another thing to manage for the government media department to manage, making life very difficult for everyone. Anyway, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells all of a sudden. So I'm going to move on and just wrap things up. So fantastic. Really good chat there. I thought I didn't know how that was going to go, but I really enjoyed the sort of self-awareness and personal development conversation that we had there. And remind everybody again, what was the name of the assessment?
The Clifton Strengths Finder.
Clifton Strengths Finder. Okay, so make sure you take that before you start developing any career plans. So we normally have a bit of a shout out this week, but I couldn't actually get into the podcast email account because I've got a new laptop and all of my passwords have been swiped. So just to say thank you very much to Lisa for being here today. Best of luck with your new career at the pension regulator. Enjoy your walks in the morning or runs in the morning. We have to start a running club, won't we, Mike? Running seems to come up quite a lot on this podcast, but
I think it's running and dog walking, actually, because I know Lisa's got dogs as well. So there's definitely running and dog walking.
Yeah, getting outside, isn't it?
Absolutely. The algorithms are going to pick up on the dog walking, the running, and we're going to attract a whole new audience. This is brilliant. Anyway, thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you from me. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, everyone.
And remember, it's not all about the numbers.